The salt on your dinner table was probably ancient seawater that sat baking under the sun for months inside a grid of shallow man-made ponds stretching as far as the eye can see. And almost nobody knows this process exists. Most people assume salt comes from underground mines, blasted out of rock like coal or iron ore. Some of it does. But the salt in a significant portion of the world's supply, particularly the sea salt now appearing on restaurant tables and premium grocery shelves, travels a completely different path. It starts as open ocean, flows into a system that would look from the air like a giant mosaic of rust red and pink rectangles, and emerges weeks or months later as gleaming white crystals ready for harvest. This is one of the oldest industrial processes on Earth, and modern operations have scaled it to a degree the ancient Romans who invented it could never have imagined. The global salt industry produces roughly 280 million metric tons per year, with a market value exceeding $14 billion annually. Sea salt specifically accounts for approximately 30% of that figure, and the top producing countries, China, the United States, India, and Australia, run evaporation operations covering hundreds of thousands of acres of coastline. This is not artisanal. This is industrial food production at planetary scale. Step 1 begins at the ocean itself. Seawater enters the system through intake pumps or gravity-fed channels located along coastlines or tidal zones. The water that arrives is already a complex chemical soup, roughly 3.5% dissolved salts, the rest water. That sounds like a small number, but inside this water is sodium chloride, magnesium, calcium, potassium, sulfates, and trace elements that will each behave differently as the water gets denser. At this stage, the water looks clean, almost indistinguishable from drinking water. It is pumped into the first in a long sequence of shallow ponds, typically no more than half a meter deep. These are called concentrating ponds, and this is where the slow, patient work of the sun begins. At large operations like the ones in San Francisco Bay, South Australia's Lake Deborah region, or the Guerrero Negro salt flats in Baja California, which alone spans over 30,000 acres and is the largest saltworks in the world. Seawater can spend anywhere from 1 to 5 years moving through a series of progressively saltier ponds before a single crystal is harvested. That timeline is not a mistake. It is the fundamental engineering principle of the entire process. The concentrating ponds are where the transformation really begins. As water sits in wide, shallow ponds exposed to sun and wind, evaporation accelerates. The math is deceptively simple. Every liter of water that evaporates leaves its dissolved salts behind, making the remaining water denser and saltier. As the brine, which is what the increasingly concentrated water is, called, moves from pond to pond, it crosses what chemists call saturation thresholds, the points at which specific minerals can no longer stay dissolved and begin precipitating out as solids. Here is where the process gets counterintuitive. Salt does not simply fall out of solution first. Calcium carbonate, essentially chalk, precipitates before sodium chloride does. Then calcium sulfate, better known as gypsum. By the time the brine reaches sodium chloride's saturation point, those earlier minerals have already dropped to the bottom of earlier ponds and been left behind. The engineers use this chemical sequence deliberately, designing each pond in the system to capture a specific mineral and discard the unwanted ones before the brine moves forward. It is a cascade of controlled chemistry, driven entirely by sunlight. The visual signature of this stage is stunning. As brine concentrates, microscopic algae called Dunaliella salina thrive in the hypersaline conditions, producing a red-orange carotenoid pigment as a stress response. This is what gives the famous pink and deep red color to mature concentrating ponds. Not contamination, not pollution, but biology. The same pigment found in carrots and flamingo feathers turns industrial salt ponds into something that looks like abstract art from a satellite image. At Guerrero Negro, flamingos and migratory birds feed on brine shrimp that thrive in these same extreme conditions, making the industrial site simultaneously a major wildlife habitat. Then comes the crystallizing pond, where salt is actually born. When the brine reaches approximately 10 times the salt concentration of normal seawater, it is pumped or channeled into the final set of ponds, the crystallizers. These are the most carefully managed in the system. Water depth is controlled tightly, usually between 25 and 40 centimeters, and inflow rate is calibrated to maintain the exact concentration window where sodium chloride crystallizes rapidly, but magnesium and other impurities remain in solution. Think of it like tuning a radio. A few degrees of concentration in either direction, and you start capturing the wrong minerals. Crystals begin forming on the pond floor and accumulate over a period of weeks. At peak harvest, the layer of salt can be 30 to 40 centimeters thick. The floor of the crystallizer looks like a white lunar landscape, with salt crust crackling underfoot, the way ice does on a frozen lake. Harvest is when the industrial scale becomes fully visible. At large, commercial saltworks, specialized harvesting machines, essentially giant combine harvesters, adapted for brine environments, move across the crystallizer beds, scraping up the salt layer and conveying it into trucks that haul it to washing and processing facilities. At Guerrero Negro, a single harvest season can yield over 7 million metric tons of raw salt. Equipment operates around the clock. The noise is extraordinary. The grind and crash of crystal slabs being broken, the rumble of trucks, the hiss of water sprayers cleaning the machines between passes. The raw harvested salt is gray-white and wet, full of residual brine and trace impurities. It goes to wash stations, where it is rinsed with saturated brine solution, not fresh water, because fresh water would dissolve the crystals, to flush out surface contaminants while leaving the sodium chloride intact. This washed salt is then stockpiled in massive white mountains, some reaching 10 to 15 meters high, where it continues to drain and dry under the sun and wind before processing. The final refining stage determines what the salt becomes. From the stockpile, salt flows into processing facilities where it is screened, crushed to size specifications, and, for food-grade products, optionally kiln-dried to reduce moisture content to below 0.1%. At this point, a critical decision is made. Does it become industrial salt, highway de-icing salt, chemical feedstock for chlorine and sodium hydroxide production, or food salt? The economic value splits sharply here. Roughly half of all salt produced globally goes to chemical manufacturing, the production of chlorine gas and caustic soda, which are foundational inputs for plastics, water treatment chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and paper. Another 8% goes to road de-icing. Only about 5 to 6% of global salt production ends up on a dinner table. But that small fraction is the most processed, the most inspected, and the most valuable per kilogram. Premium sea salt, the flake salt, the gray salt from Brittany, the Himalayan-style finishing salts, undergoes either additional slow evaporation under controlled conditions or is raked by hand from specific shallow beds to produce crystals with particular geometry and mineral profiles. These products can sell for 100 times the price of commodity industrial salt per kilogram. What began as open seawater containing 35 grams of dissolved material per liter has traveled through months or years of managed chemistry, biology, and engineering to become the crystalline mineral sitting in a shaker on your table. The next time you reach for salt while cooking, or use a dishwasher cleaning with chlorine-based detergent, or drive on a road that was treated to prevent ice, or take a medication whose production required chlorine chemistry, you are touching the downstream product of those vast, sunlit ponds. A process older than Rome, now operating at a scale Rome never dreamed of. What else do you walk past every day without knowing the industrial story behind it? If that question interests you, there is a lot more where this came from.